Today on the Freelance Mindset Studio podcast, I am so excited because we are joined by Natasha Mehra. Natasha is incredibly impressive. She is a pharmacist, a photographer, a dancer, an actor, and so much more. And Natasha is going to tell us about her journey from unfolding all of these different parts of her career portfolio. But first, thank you, Natasha, for joining.
Thank you, Joy. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I'm so happy you're here. So, just to kick things off, you have such a multifaceted career. All of the titles that I mentioned, from pharmacy to dance and the arts, how does a career like yours unfold? Was this the vision that you had when you first started out?
I don't think it was a vision I had per se when I first started out, but a lot of the creative endeavors, they began pretty early on. So I've been dancing since I was very young. I started training in tap, jazz, ballet back in the first grade and shifted away from there, moved to classical Indian dance, Kathak, right around the third grade. I was about 9 years old, I want to say. So I have been dancing for a lot of my life. It's always been a part of my routine, alongside academics. Dance in general was a big part of my routine. Throughout high school, I continued on a Bollywood competitive dance team. I also used to teach dance to young kids as well as adults. And when I went to pharmacy school, as you mentioned, I'm a pharmacist. So when I went to pharmacy school, alongside my pharmacy curriculum, I was still dancing. I was on a competitive dance team, Rutgers Pangra, and we competed around the country as well as in Canada. So dance has been around for a really long time. More recently, I've been focusing on Kathak last 5 years or so. And photography, I'll say, when people ask me that question, I often revert to, I've been exploring photography for the last 10 years since I got a professional camera, but actually I have been photographing since I was probably in middle school. My first camera was a Polaroid iZone. If you've ever seen one of them or remember, the picture actually comes out on a Polaroid and it's a sticker, so you can, take the back off and post it somewhere. Beyond that, I had a Canon point and shoot, Nikon, eventually a Sony. And I was taking my point and shoot everywhere. So to my dance competitions, to family events, to weddings, graduations, birthdays. So it's always been a part of my life, but I started exploring it more seriously, I would say about 10 years ago. Acting came on a little bit later, post pharmacy school. I did some training at Lee Strasberg and then at HB Studio where you and I met. I'll say that, all of these different skills and all of these different areas kind of tie into one theme where a lot of storytelling. So even in my pharmacy career now, what I'm currently doing involves a lot of storytelling in a different way. But yeah, so it's been a long journey, but a lot of these things have been a part of my life for a very long time, and just things I'm not ready to let go or move on from.
Beautiful. So the threads were always there. Growing up, I got asked a lot, what do you want to be when you grow up? Were you asked the same question? What did the end game look like when you were first starting out?
That's a really good question. I didn't have this idea I'm going to be a pharmacist. I didn't know what a pharmacist even does. So I didn't necessarily say, oh, I want to grow up and be a pharmacist. But I had an inclination for science, inclination for math. I did like biology quite a bit. And I don't think my parents ever pressured myself or any of my sisters into certain careers. But I think in the community we grew up in and being a first generation American, it's common to go into certain paths, whether it's medicine or law or engineering. And so, again, while nobody applied any kind of pressure, it was sort of subliminal that, there will be some kind of science or healthcare career, whether that was pharmacy or medicine or dentistry. And I had a sister who was at Rutgers, and she knew somebody who was in the pharmacy program and spoke really highly of it. And so I applied. It was a 6 year program in New Brunswick, New Jersey. I'm originally from New Jersey. So it just seemed like a very secure, sort of safe path. And at the time, that's kind of what made sense. And so to answer your question, I don't think I had this idea of, oh, I want to be an actor or I want to be a dancer. I just kind of was open and went with the flow.
That's beautiful. And having that opportunity to explore and figure out what path made sense to you is really lovely. And I understand kind of the pull toward a safe trade, given that I am a lawyer and sciences were not my forte when I was growing up. So I can really resonate with that. But now, several years into the career, I think I've observed, but would love to hear from you, the weight on different parts of your career portfolio has shifted. So you maybe started off with, from what I've seen, pharmacy as being the anchor of your career. And then over time, in different seasons of your life, how has that shifted from being the core of your portfolio to playing a different role so that you could bring in other elements like acting and dance into your life?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've had a number of transitions in my pharmacy career. I started out as a clinical pharmacist, and I was very lucky. My first manager became a good friend of mine, and at the time, I wanted to explore acting. I was accepted into the Lee Strasberg method acting program, and it was the part time program, so it was 1 day a week. And so my manager at the time allowed me to use my vacation time, take 1 day a week off so I can go do that program. And so I definitely have always been very open about having these external interests, even within my pharmacy career. And I've been lucky to have receptive managers, bosses who have encouraged all of my creative endeavors. And in transitions, when I knew I wanted to explore something different, even on the pharmacy side, I actually took a little time off. So I took about 8 months off, went backpacking, and that is a time where photography became a big focus for me. And I learned a lot on that trip. I learned from other photographers. I learned a lot about wildlife, landscapes. And when I came back, while I was traveling, I only had one camera and one body, one lens and one body. And when I came back, I realized, okay, if I want to explore, this is somewhere I'm going to need to invest, get a couple of different lenses, and continue to explore photography. And at the same time, I was working per diem as a pharmacist, and I think this is one of the big pros being a pharmacist. There are a lot of ways you can find that time, whether it's in a transition period, working per diem, or working freelance, or even if it's not your transition period, choosing to work per diem or choosing to work freelance. There are opportunities within pharma and within healthcare to do that. So there have been, like that time, there's been another time where I took about a year sabbatical where a little more focus on acting. However, it was during the pandemic, so it was a lot of virtual acting, and opportunities looked a little different at that time. And while I am working, certainly I'll say this, you can't do everything all at once. And so you kind of have to pick and choose different opportunities that are coming up. What is exciting? What do you want to prioritize? And I'll say throughout my career, I've had times, I've had opportunities. I think I'm lucky in that way to kind of take a little bit of a break from pharmacy and explore more on the creative side, and then use use that time to sort of help shape how I'm going to balance when I'm coming back to something more full time or just more demanding in general on the pharmacy side.
That makes sense. And there's so much in there that I want to unpack, and I'm so excited. The first part that I want to ask about is it's really fascinating that you talk about how when you first considered becoming a pharmacist, the thing that appealed to you most was the fact that it was stable. And now, having been a pharmacist, one of the biggest draws seems to be the flexibility because it's allowed you to have all of these other opportunities as well, and it adjust your work to fit kind of the goals in your life at that moment. I think one thing that was especially notable was when you mentioned that you are taking a day off a week. You got the agreement from your manager to be able to take 1 day to do your Strasbourg class, which is fantastic. And it sounds actually quite dreamy to have the best of both worlds. What was that like? Was that difficult to set up? Was there any concern about how you needed to frame this for your manager so that they didn't get concerned that you might leave or that this was going to turn into something else?
So I remember, this was some time ago, but I remember just having an open conversation. I want to say at the time I was teaching dance also. Monday nights I used to teach an adults dance class, and my manager knew that. I was also training in martial arts. My manager knew that. I was very open about, the things that I did outside of work. I think that is unique to where I was working. It was a wonderful job, a very strong culture on work-life balance. And I don't know that every opportunity, every industry is going to look the same. But I think it was simple, open, honest conversation with my manager and just letting her know, hey, I interviewed for this. I have an opportunity to do it, and I think she said something along the lines of, "If I had that talent, I would do it. So go for it." I was just very. She's a very lovely person, and yeah, I think again, I was very lucky to work for her.
Sounds like an incredible manager. I'm so grateful that you had her. Wow. So I think that for anybody who's listening and who's thinking about whether or not to have the conversation with their manager and what will their manager think, it sounds like developing that rapport. If you have a relationship with your manager where you can be open and where you can share some of your pursuits, and I imagine you were also doing really a good job at work, so there wasn't any doubt about whether or not you'd be able to perform if you took some time, like a few hours away a week. But that's really hopeful and really inspiring to hear that it was possible. Now, another thing you mentioned was that you took a couple of sabbaticals in your career to be able to dive deeper. But you also have to pick and choose, and that's one thing that I know I personally struggle with is I have so many things that I'm interested in, and the hours are finite. And how do you think about picking and choosing? And how did you even think about it was the time to take a sabbatical?
I had this idea. I worked in a hospital. I was a clinical pharmacist. I had this idea. I wanted to explore pharma. I went to pharmacy school in New Jersey. New Jersey is very big on pharma. And so it was kind of in the back of my mind. I didn't want to do it the other way around. I did want to develop my clinical skills. I wanted to understand how it worked in a hospital, seeing patients. And I was at a stage where, okay, I kind of want to explore. And my thought process at the time was early in your career might be better time to take risks, move around, explore, essentially. And so I kind of was ready to do that. And, another thing I'll mention is while working in a hospital, I used to work on a geriatric unit quite a bit. And so it got me thinking, end of life, what do I want my life to look like when I get to that point? And so I just kind of started thinking about exploring different things. And I thought, okay, if I'm going to take the time now to transition, this might be a good time for a gap. And, I love to travel. That's also something from a young age. And I thought this is no better time than now. At that point, I think had paid off all my student loans and felt like, okay, I can do this and still feel secure coming back and working per diem or picking up shifts until, I figure out what's next.
Yeah, I think that perspective must have been so valuable. You're very lucky to be able to see all different stages of a life and a career and be able to use that as an input to think about how to shape your own at that moment. Before you took the sabbatical, did you line anything up in terms of work to be there when you come back? Or was it that you had built enough of a foundation that you felt confident you would be able to figure it out once the sabbatical was over?
A little bit of both. I didn't have anything lined up very concrete. I did have some experience working per diem in retail pharmacy as well. And I knew that there was an opportunity to work per diem on the hospital side, given my hospital experience. So I had a level of confidence that, I have 4 or 5 years of experience. I'll be able to come back and secure something once I'm back.
Amazing. Now, coming to the other question, how do you pick and choose with limited time?
Yeah, that's, well, let me ask you, how do you pick and choose? Do you mean what to focus on during a sabbatical, or do you mean just general day to day?
Yeah, actually, that's a really good question because I think in a sabbatical you have a luxury of more time, so you can both go wider, but you can also go deeper in one thing if that's what you decide to do. Whereas when you're working, your time is so compressed that it's really valuable. Every hour that you spend outside of work has such a high opportunity cost because you could be resting, preparing for the week, focusing on work itself. How does it differ for you?
I think that's a challenge for everyone who has this multi hyphenated path, and it's time is the biggest challenge. One thing is I have a set of things that I have to do and a set of things I want to do. So the have to do's are sleep, have to sleep, have to take my dog out. I like to eat food, cooked fresh, so have to cook. And then there are things for my pharmacy work. Okay, I have to do this or I have to do this. So there are some things that kind of I know take priority. And then beyond that, it depends. It varies week to week. If there's an opportunity that comes up that I want to prioritize, or if there's a project that I'm working on that I want to prioritize, it really just depends. What takes greater priority, what I'm more interested in, what I think I would be able to learn more from. Uh, Another one would be maybe where I might meet people who I can connect with and I can learn from them. So a couple of different things when I'm evaluating, okay, what do I want to take on in terms of the day to day.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think it's really fitting that the framework you just shared sounds like a blend of your head in terms of thinking strategically about where you might meet people or what you might be able to learn. And then also there was a real heart element too about what you're excited about and what seems to have energy around it. So that absolutely resonates and completely tracks given that you have both this corporate and the creative career coming together as one.
Yeah, for sure. And, just coming back to it, I don't think there's any way around the challenge of feeling like, oh, I wish I could do this too, or I wish I could do that too. So I totally get it. There are definitely ideas that sometimes I look back a year later and I'm like, oh, wow, I really didn't get to touch that at all or work on that at all. So it's tough. Yeah, it's a tough balancing act.
Yeah. And it's also a beautiful problem because at least there are so many things that are exciting that you want to be able to do. Imagine if it were getting boring, that would be a different problem to solve.
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And then I like to think of it that way. Everything I'm doing, this is all a bonus. This is all a plus. So there's no right or wrong answer really, because everything is a plus.
Yeah. So I guess looking ahead, do you currently have any role models for what you'd like your career to look like in a few years' time? Did you ever have a role model?
That's a good question. Growing up, I don't think it was as common to see people in this multi-hyphenated space. The first person that comes to mind is Ken Jeong. Do you remember Ken Jeong?
No, remind me.
So he's a physician. I think he's from California or somewhere on the West Coast. And he was a comedian and an actor.
Oh
He
yeah.
hasn't been in the public space in some time, but he was one of the first that was, oh wow, this guy's a physician and he's a comedian and he's an actor. So I
Yeah.
remember thinking, wow, okay, he was one of the first people to make me feel like it is possible to do multiple things. And now in my current role, I work with a lot of ophthalmologists, and they're the most talented people. I have one ophthalmologist who's a surgeon, and he's also a DJ.
Wow.
And he's not DJing, birthday parties or weddings. He's DJing in Las Vegas, doing these big
Wow.
sets, or in Chicago or in New York, around the world. And I just think to myself, if that guy can be a surgeon during the day and be a DJ at night, why not? You know what I mean? So yeah, certainly I've met a lot of people who I find impressive, that I admire, and I it makes me feel that this is a possible doable path.
Yeah. Do you remember roughly where in your journey you were when you discovered Ken Jeong?
It must have been early in my pharmacy career.
Okay. So
Early in my pharmacy career.
amazing.
I
I
might have
think,
even been in pharmacy school at the time.
oh, cool. So you were thinking about what would life look like on the other side of pharmacy school, and then you started to see some models of people who had this kind of hybrid career and were making it work, even though I think when we were a few years younger than that, when we were in college or in high school, these kinds of models were not as prevalent. I'm sure that they existed. People have been, the term Renaissance man is clearly from the Renaissance. So uh, it has existed, but we just didn't talk about it. We talked about specializing and choosing your track and building your life in one direction. But that's really cool that you got those models really early on. Has your model shifted?
I'm going to just add to something you mentioned, if it's
Yeah,
okay.
of course.
I think also the difference is, our being first generation American, I think a lot of us can relate in the sense that our parents came and they were looking for security and secure jobs. And so this idea of Renaissance man, while certainly it's a long-standing concept, I don't think I had so much exposure until a little later in life. It was just that kind of one path: have a family, have a career, and this idea of doing multiple things was not as, like you said, prevalent. So yeah, I just wanted to add that I think it's a little different in terms of different scenarios and in everybody's journey.
Yeah, definitely. I think coming from a family of immigrants, priority one was to be able to fit in into the new environment, make your mark, and like find your little niche and be able to get that stability. And then, if and when you found that stability, then you could think about branching out. And then I think there was plenty of community support to have hobbies later once you had figured everything out. But to actually make it into part of your career or take an artistic pursuit with the same level of seriousness as a corporate pursuit was just a relatively early model when I was growing up as well.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's changed quite a bit in today. I will say, younger generations, I see that being embraced quite a bit more, especially with social media, YouTube. Now it's more surprising to see somebody who just does one thing, I
I
think.
know. It's so surprising. This has actually somehow become the norm, and the data is backing it up. Actually, the majority of millennials and Gen Z do have some sort of side hustle outside of work, whether that's creative or not. And so we're in this world where maybe you differentiate by specializing, and that will be the case 5 to 10 years from now. But it's really a beautiful moment where everybody is tapping into these different skill sets that they have and these different parts of their identity and giving them the space to flourish and being able to have some time and some resources to devote to that.
Absolutely, yeah, and thank you for sharing that. It doesn't surprise me that the data kind of aligns with that as well.
Yeah. So, what does a week look like for you these days when you're actually working as a pharmacist? And then you also have your photography, your dance, and acting as well as anything else. Plus the non negotiables like sleep, you mentioned.
Yeah, that's my number one
Mine
non-negotiable.
too.
I definitely love my sleep. I'll say this, well, probably one of the toughest questions because every week looks so different. Even my current role as a pharmacist is the schedule varies week to week. It's a lot of meeting based, project based, and things can shift in a day, let alone a week. And so I try to plan ahead. I try to plan by quarter. I try to start looking at the year, a few months prior to the following year. So November, what are some of the big things next year? What are some of the things that I want to work on? And then like I said, there are some non-negotiables in the day. I definitely try to find time to exercise. Sometimes in the morning, sometimes I like to do that midday because it helps to break up the day. So whether it's I'm dancing or I'm training or I'm practicing, doing we call it riyaz during the day, midday, or sometimes in the morning. I still train under a teacher based in India, and I do that once a week. So that's pretty early in the morning, just based on time zones. And I try to kind of break out my day, and I feel like I've heard this on other podcasts as well. Having 2 hours of focused work and then having some time to kind of step away and then coming back to work on things, and then maybe prioritizing some of the more challenging tasks earlier in the day. I do think I function better a little more in the morning. So that's usually the priority stuff that I have to do. And then I try to use some of the afternoon or even after dinner to work on some of my creative, whether I'm editing photos or I'm been writing a travel blog, so working on a travel blog. That's more of my evenings, I would say. And then weekends, try to step away, do fun things, but sometimes photography can be a part of that as well, depending on if we're taking a road trip or just going for a walk and finding birds on my walk. So just coming back to your question, I would say week to week varies, but I do try to look at my day in blocks and do some of the more focused core things that I need to accomplish earlier in the day, and then more of the creative. Maybe I need a little less brain power. That's evening I'll dedicate usually to that.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And I agree. I think having a little bit of movement in the middle of the day really just helps with work and helps to unlock my brain and my ability to produce. So I love that as a schedule. Given that we're kind of at the beginning of this year, early-ish in 2026, what are some of the things that you're hoping to work on this year?
That's a good question. So, one of them is, as I mentioned, I'm working on a travel blog and looking at social media. I've had a presence on Instagram, mostly photography. I do post some personal, but a lot of photography. And I am looking to maybe branch out into other platforms. So, whether that's YouTube, uh, TikTok. I haven't really explored those, but maybe bringing my photography more to the forefront in some of these platforms. I am also hoping to host a Kathak workshop. Most likely it'll be locally in Champaign, and I can also consider Chicago. And looking also to expand some of my Kathak training to coming back to teaching dance. Yeah, I kind of stepped away from teaching a few years ago, partly because I wanted to further develop my Kathak skills and teach a more focused Kathak based class. In the past, I was teaching a lot more fusion, Bollywood, Bhangra, everything kind of mishmashed. Whereas I find Kathak is a little more technical and skill based. So I really wanted to develop further there before I could branch out and teach. But I'm hoping to teach a bit more this year.
It's so exciting. It sounds like a great year ahead. Fingers crossed, and I would love to take your class if and when it's available and I'm in town. Uh, so that sounds exciting for 2026. I just wanted to now move into a moment of reflection of how you got here. So if you're looking back on your portfolio career, what is kind of one of the hardest lessons that you've had to learn?
That's a good question. I think one of the hardest lessons is you really can't do everything at one time. And I think giving yourself grace and not putting so much pressure on yourself. So anybody listening, just giving yourself some grace and allowing yourself the time to grow. Hopefully, you have a very long lifespan and you'll have the time to work on different things. Avoiding some of that pressure to feel like everything needs to be done today or everything needs to be done tomorrow. And I think sometimes when anyone who's earlier in their career is looking at somebody 10, 15, 20, 30 years out, you see that a person may have accomplished so many things, but that didn't happen overnight. That didn't happen in one day. It took years of persistence, years of dedication to get to whatever stage they're at. For anybody listening who has, multiple skills, just know that you have the time to work on those. And again, everything doesn't have to be done overnight or in one moment or one day. So give yourself grace, make sure you're getting your sleep, and allow yourself the time to grow and to explore.
Yeah, that's really helpful advice for me even now. I think no matter where you are in your career, there is a lot of pressure to uh, be an overnight success or to have accomplished XYZ thing before the next milestone birthday. And I'm looking at a milestone birthday in about a year. So I think recognizing that it takes time to build things and that you can incrementally keep adding on over the years is really, really important and to go easy because with a little, hopefully with luck and with grace, we'll have many years to be working on it. And it's really important to not compromise the sleep, the exercise, the taking your dog for a walk, and having a life outside as well. Because the things that you do are motivated by something deeper, and that motivation and that connection can stay if you continue to nurture it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, if I can add, I'll just say that a lot of the things for me, at least photography, dance, acting, these are all things I genuinely enjoy doing. So, this idea of, the pressure to find success quickly or achieve success quickly and general idea of success, I think for each individual, they have to reflect and understand what that actually looks like because I think just being able to do those things, having the time to do those things in a way is a success.
That message is just so nourishing for my nervous system. I feel like, huh, just even getting to work on it is a privilege, and that's something that we lose sight of because we're always thinking about we. When I say we, the royal we, I mean I myself am always
Yeah.
thinking about the next goal. And so, thank you for articulating that so beautifully. Is there anything you would do differently if you could go back into your career over?
I'm sure if I looked back and analyzed, I could probably say 100 different things. But I almost feel that there's no there's not much sense in doing that. Yeah, I just think that at this point it's what am I doing now and what do I want to do in the future and how do I work towards that because nobody can go back and change the past, you know? And I think I made the best informed decisions that I could at the time I had to make those decisions. Um, and yeah, I just try to be grateful for all the things I've done, been able to do. And um, yeah,
Yeah. So I think that would really resonate with anybody who's trying to make a decision and it feels like the decision they're making is the decision. Do I go down one path or another path? It always feels existential at the moment of making the decision and of choosing it. But when you're a few years past the decision, the hope is that you'll be able to give yourself grace because you will enjoy and you will learn and you will come to terms with whichever path you take. And it's not so existential as it seems in the moment. You can always change paths later. You can find new ways of enjoying the path that you're on or the one that you've chosen if it is an irreversible decision. Um, Great. So now, as we wrap up, I know you've got a big 2026 ahead. Is there anything that you're working on that you'd like to tell the audience about?
yeah, absolutely. I'd love to share. I'm working on a travel blog and also expanding my presence through social media, mainly focused around photography and travel. I have explored landscape photography, I've explored nature photography, a lot of night sky, and a lot of 2025 for me was exploring wildlife. Hoping to have the time to share that and would love for the audience to join and, just anybody who's interested in photography to connect.
Amazing. Where can they find you?
So I would say Instagram would be one way to connect. My first name, last name, photography. So Natasha Mehra Photography, as well as can always connect on my personal Instagram. That's Natashme, Natashme.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Natasha, for joining. I've learned so much. And as I mentioned, you have such a calming presence. My nervous system feels very relaxed after hearing your perspective and your insights. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Joy.